Bob Dylan's Odyssey, an extensive look at the legendary musician's life. Throughout his career, Bob Dylan has consistently strayed from one musical genre to another, leaving fans to struggle to place him in the appropriate category. Dylan is unquestionably one of the best and most influential musicians in the world, regardless of whether you appreciate his music or not, find fault with his singing or sense its unadulterated power, or consider his lyrics to be merely lyrics or works of absolute poetry. Who is Bob Dylan? Bob Dylan's primary strength is his music, but he also has an intriguing personality and temperament. He appears to be a perfect example of that ideal of the lone wise poet, going away for a while and then coming back at the appropriate time to share some of his wisdom. In every sense of the word, he is also stubborn. In the early 1960s, Dylan began his career in New York as a folk performer. He transitioned to protest songs, just as his audience began to perceive him as a folk singer. And before this label could be applied, he picked up an electric guitar and began performing rock and roll tunes. Bob Dylan apparently disagreed with what people believed he should be and was, and instead came up with new personas to represent and songs to create. Let's examine Dylan's diverse career to try to pinpoint all the genres he experimented with. In the beginning, there was a folk singer. Bob Dylan, whose name was inspired by his favorite poet, Dylan Thomas, was born Robert Allen Zimmerman in 1941. Like other artists, Dylan wasn't embarrassed to take inspiration from his heroes in the early years of his career. His early portfolio largely featured well-known songs from this tradition, with Woody Guthrie serving as his primary source of inspiration. He was influenced by traditional American folk music. At the start of the folk revival movement, which saw artists like Dave Von Ronk, Joan Baez, and Joni Mitchell revive the folk music classics, Bob Dylan came to New York in 1961. They performed in modest venues in the city's basement taverns and cafes. Dylan gained notoriety for his playing style, which fused his raw singing voice with an acoustic guitar and harmonica. All of this led to stirring performances of well-known songs. He recorded and published his debut album in 1962. It was a self-titled compilation of 2 original compositions and his covers of traditional folk tunes. With barely 5,000 copies sold, the album didn't do too well, but his life would be dramatically altered by his second record. The next year, he recorded and published the freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Dylan's original tunes were the only ones on this album. Blowin' in the Wind, one of his songs, became a 1960s anthem. Its blend of traditional melodies and socially conscious lyrics immediately won the support of the counterculture movement of the time. The thoughts and aspirations of a whole generation revolting against everything they believed to be wrong with American society were expressed in songs like Masters of War and A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall. Their emotions seem to be eloquently summed up in Dylan's songs. Once a protest singer, always a protest singer? Fans have always perceived Bob Dylan's songs as protest songs, despite his reluctance to call them such. Even while fans labeled a few of Dylan's songs from the freewheelin' Bob Dylan as protest songs, his subsequent 2 albums in 1964 would significantly increase this position. The songs that Bob Dylan released on both albums are the most politically charged of his career, and he acknowledged his responsibility as the poet of a generation in turmoil this year. Dylan confidently sung about what his generation was fighting for, from the poignant and genuine tale of the lonesome death of Hattie Carroll to the scathing critiques of Only a Pawn in Their Game. For hundreds of thousands of loyal devotees who viewed him as their god, he performed at concerts and festivals around the United States. For the remainder of his career, Dylan, on the other hand, would make more attempts than any other artist to avoid this label. Fans, however, insisted that he write a song on new issues that arose, despite his best efforts to avoid being labeled a protest singer. They would be dissatisfied and accuse him of betraying them if he was unable to accomplish that. In short, Dylan wanted to go on to the next phase of his career and was finished with this one. He never wanted to focus on just one thing, and he didn't give a damn if it pleased or upset his admirers. Newport, 1965. Dylan Goes Electric. When throngs of enthusiastic fans flocked to watch Bob Dylan perform at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, they expected to hear politically conscious, thought-provoking protest songs sung in his droll voice and played on an acoustic guitar with an accompanying harmonica. Dylan had become the festival's face. Dylan surprised everyone by entering the stage with a band behind him and a Stratocaster. He became energized. In a momentous performance that would forever change the course of music history, Bob Dylan performed Maggie's Farm with maximum distortion while being jeered by the audience the entire time. One individual even allegedly approached the stage and attempted to use an axe to sever the cables. Nevertheless, Dylan accepted his new identity as a rock and roll performer with the same tenacity for which he has always been known, putting out numerous albums that went on to become iconic rock classics. Highway 61 Revisited and Bringing It All Back Home were both published that year. He included electric guitar tracks with a full band in two of his most well-known pieces. Bob Dylan abandoned his folk roots for heavier songs that embraced the psychedelic rock era of the mid-60s in their lyrics, such as Ballad of a Thin Man, Like a Rolling Stone, and Subterranean Homesick Blues. Dylan gained a new and larger audience thanks to lines like "The man in the coonskin cap and a pig pen wants $11. You only got 10. These lines seem like the ranting of a crazy person who is under the influence of magic. It is clear from the 1965 documentary, Don't Look Back, how Dylan was praised and viewed. Hundreds of thousands of admirers waited in enormous lines to see him during his 1966 tour of England. According to the concert film, Dylan was becoming into a legend, and everyone knew it. Beyond the glorious 1960s, Dylan reinventing himself. Bob Dylan suffered his well-known motorbike accident at the end of 1966. Even though the collision wasn't serious, it forced him to stop and concentrate on his loved ones. He and his band embarked on a lengthy tour and performed in massive, sold-out arenas when he reappeared in 1974. Even though he was not performing, he was nevertheless able to put out a couple CDs at that time. While New Morning and Self-Portrait were attempts at something fresh and unconventional, Blonde on Blonde is perhaps his best, while John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline signaled a return to his roots. Following a terrible divorce and his comeback to the stage, he released two of the most exquisite yet melancholic albums, Desire and Blood on the Tracks. These CDs revealed to the world a sorrowful and vulnerable side of Dylan that had hitherto been hidden. Songs like If You See Her, Say Hello, and Sarah have a hint of romance, but they also have a lot of blues in them. A few poor pieces and a few hidden gems would follow these two outstanding pieces of art. Oh Mercy, one of his most underappreciated pieces, was published in 1989. Dylan recorded and released a blues rock album with U2 producer Daniel Lanois that would serve as the foundation for the rest of his career. In his Memoir Chronicles Volume 1, he talks positively about this time and admits that he had some reservations about the album's production. Bob Dylan today, a wise old poet speaking. Bob Dylan's most recent albums reflect a sophisticated, wise, and mature taste. Generally slower and longer, his unofficial trilogy, Time Out of Mind, Love and Theft, and Modern Times, heavily emphasizes lyrical and narrative. For instance, Dylan explores a variety of subjects and personal concerns in the 16-minute song Highlands from the previously mentioned Time Out of Mind. It contains his droll, aging voice and a sparse bluesy guitar and drum arrangement, and it unfolds more like a short tale than a song. The COVID-19 pandemic coincided with the publication of his most recent album, Rough and Rowdy Ways. At the age of 82, Bob Dylan is still performing, so maybe we'll get one or two more albums from him before he retires. One can't help but wonder what else a man who has accomplished nearly everything in the music industry has to offer.